strike rate's very, very overrated.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strike Rate, the cricket analytics podcast with me, Jack Hope, and Dan Weston. On this week's episode, we're going to be talking about drafts and auctions and what happens in them. Last week, we talked about how to prepare and the strategizing that happens prior to it all kicking off. But obviously, once the show's on the road, things can get a little bit hairy, can't they, Dan? How are you doing? And, how are you doing?
Yeah, no, really, really good, mate. Thank you. Looking forward to doing this episode. I think it's going to be hopefully a really good chat about the sort of second part of the draft and auction dynamics and how it pans out when you're actually at the event.
So I think the first question I've got for you, before I ask the first question, what I will actually do is just remind people to like and subscribe and leave a comment and follow you on Twitter at SA Advantage if they want to ask a question, and remind people that the format of the show is a little discussion between Dan and I, followed by quite a few questions from our listeners on this one. We've got 7 or 8, so a lot of interaction. But the first question related to our actual topic is like when you get into that room or you're at the draft booth, as it looked like in the 100, the table at the auction. What are you feeling from a completely non-analytical point of view? You've done all your pre-auction stuff. You're there. You're wearing your team uniform or whatever it is. What's your headspace? Do you do any preparation before you get there?
Well, in terms of like visualization and things like that,
or mindfulness.
I did a bit in the 100 draft because actually we did like a mock draft the day before the actual draft, where that is, you're testing the technology and stuff like that. So you're in the booths, you understand what the lighting's like in the room and how it's all kind of shaped in like a horseshoe layout, basically. So you kind of understand like where you might be in relation to other teams and things like that. So there were certainly some stuff that you could grasp a little bit before the event, which I personally like. I like having information and I like being able to process stuff visually in advance. So that was good for me. That draft in 2019 was my first draft that I did. So I think it's probably normal that you're going to be a little bit nervous about it, especially as it's going out live on Sky Sports and stuff like that, and there's going to be probably people judging you for decisions that may or may not be your responsibility, and ultimately, yeah, you're going to be nervous. But as long as you prep well, I don't think it's too bad. And I think that the level of prep that you do ahead of an event like a draft or an auction really does determine how you feel walking into the room. So I remember when I did the mega auction 2022 at the IPL, I can promise you this right now, like, hand on heart, and my heart's still weak, but I'll put my hand on heart and say I wasn't nervous, because literally I felt that if anyone else had done the level of prep that we'd done, then they deserve to beat us. Simple as that. Like I was really at peace with the work that we'd done ahead of the auction, and so therefore, what's the point of being nervous? Because you've literally done everything that you can. You've backed yourself. You think that you're a good person to do this job. You've done all the hard work. Just go and execute it. It's quite straightforward. And so, definitely, the more you do them, the less nervous you get, and the more you just kind of view them as a routine day kind of thing.
So, follow-up question to that, and this relates to probably most people's experience of auctions or drafts. So I'm thinking here fantasy sports, particularly the American ones where you'll play the group of mates and you'll have a roster to fill and all the players from the NFL or whatever, and the site you're on, what generally happens is it will rank the players in order, in like a simulated draft order, with the most valuable being at number 1 and the least value being at 2,500. And then you sort of go from there.
Yeah.
How similar to that experience is the real thing?
I don't think it's similar to that at all, because I don't think that there's nearly the level of scrutiny on cricket picks as there is in American sports, basically. And I would like to see more scrutiny. I would like to see, the headline of a newspaper being, I don't know, Manchester Originals make shock 125k purchase of Dane Villas with like the first auction or something like that, because that's scrutiny. That's what I want to see. I want accountability and I want scrutiny in cricket. We don't really get it. And actually, on a side note, I do think that kind of the level of analysis in T20 drafts and auctions from broadcasters should be so much better.
Cool. Let's get into the nuts and bolts a little bit then. You're in the auction, you're in the draft. You know where you're going to, you know what your priority targets are. You know where you're going to be picking if it's a draft. As a general point here, what's your priority focus at the outset of the event? Like, are you thinking about this from the perspective of somebody who has to feel, it has three main priorities? I have to get a batter who can bowl a little bit of off spin, or are you thinking, a slightly bigger picture here, or are you thinking later rounds, like I'll see what I can do early, and then I'll prove my value later in the draft?
No, I think the most important thing actually is staying level and sticking to the kind of semi-flexible plan that you've developed in advance, rather than getting emotional. And there are different ways of doing that. So if actually anyone's got they're bored enough to do it, they can go back and look at the bids in the 2020 mega auction and see which teams had the most successful bids for the players that they bid on. So, for example, you might buy 20 players, but you might bid on 40, so that's like a 50% success rate. But I know that there was one team who bid on like 70 players, so they were like completely scattergun and maybe didn't have that coherent plan, and maybe did get drawn into emotion very, very quickly. So for me, that's important. I'm not looking at it from like we didn't get him, that's disaster point of view. I'm like, okay, so how do we reassess from that? And the auction environment is actually really good, because there's a lot of, you probably don't see it on TV, but there's actually quite a lot of dead patches where you can really kind of gather your thoughts and maybe run a few numbers and then have a quick chat between a few people. There's breaks quite often, but also there might be like, say there's a round of eight players, but you're only interested in one. He's drawn out first, and you're not interested in the next seven. You've got like 20 minutes to work out a strategy to deal with the player who you missed out on. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's a lot of patches where maybe you're not intensively involved in the auction process. You've got time to then chat about implications of certain decisions and things like that.
So what you're saying here is that once you've done your preparation, you actually need to not park it, but you need to be aware that what you're involved in is a living beast. It's going to evolve. It's going to go down routes that you maybe didn't think. You might not get the player that you wanted. You might not get the batting off spinner, or the batter who can bowl a little bit of off spin, and you might have to come up with a different plan. And part of the preparation is being open to that possibility and having that game tree or that decision tree partly mapped out already.
Yeah, 100%. And so, look, if anyone goes into an auction, especially a mega auction, and says, "All right, I want him, and him," right? And no matter what, we're going to pay it. They're gonna have a lot of problems, because they're going to bid absolute fortunes for those five and have like a load of junk otherwise, apart from them. So you've got to be flexible. You can't be fixated on one player. That's for me, that's just crazy.
And to follow that up then, and this is something that you noted down as a topic that you wanted to touch on, like game theory, like first of all, you're going to have to explain this in two parts. So you're going to have to explain to the listeners what we mean by game theory, and then you're going to have to explain how that applies to an auction or to a draft.
Okay, so basically, for me, the way I look at it will be, how do the decisions that you make influence other teams, or how do decisions that they make influence your thinking? So, for example, I played a lot of poker, and I spoke about this in one of the earlier episodes, and that actually the tournament dynamic of poker is very, very similar to the auction dynamic of, say, the IPL, multi-day event, few breaks, a few patches where maybe you're not going to be at the forefront of the activity. And the thing with poker in the tournament is that a big stack rules, because if you've got the biggest stack on the table, you can't be eliminated in a tournament. It's impossible, because no one's got the chips that can match you. So the worst they can do is damage you. They can't break you. And my theory, which I worked on a lot actually, in terms of this kind of game theory situation, was that there were a lot of traps in rounds 1, 2, 3. In the early rounds, you could lose the auction very, very quickly, but you couldn't win the auction. That was clear to me, and so it was almost worth steering clear of, especially the first 2 rounds, to be that big stack subsequently, and then bully teams later on because of your decision making in an early round. So the conscious thought theory is that, okay, actually we're gonna hold fire a little bit. We're gonna sit on our hands. We're gonna might pick 1 or 2 bargains up, but that's about it. Yeah, and we're gonna have, I don't know, 60 crore when everyone else has got 25 or 30 to push them around later on. And so it's implications of their decisions, and a conscious point on your part to take advantage of those decisions that other teams have made.
So to follow that up, and I think for the last question in part 1, you're trying to plan that out. What happens if another team does something that is completely unexpected? So I'm going to give you a hypothetical question here, and we talked about this in part 1. And you said when you were game planning the auction in 2021, you were pretty sure that Mumbai Indians were going to go in heavy on Ishan Kishan, and that would leave them in a situation where buying bowlers was going to be difficult, and in fact negotiating the rest of the auction was going to be difficult. What if Mumbai Indians put the paddle down and Sunrisers Hyderabad bought Ishan Kishan, and you're looking at an entirely different auction?
Well, if memory serves me correctly, they should have pushed Mumbai harder for it. I think there was a lot of times where Sunrisers ended up being the kind of inadvertent big stack in that mega auction 22, and then sort of gave up too early on the bidding of a player rather than wielding their stack to push teams around a little bit. So yeah, that would have been an interesting one for sure. But look, teams do things that are unexpected all the time, but there's degrees of unexpectation. I use the 2019 100 draft example of Dane Villas at Manchester earlier. I don't think anyone in the room expected that. And the image of Josh Butler on TV went pretty viral after that, as well as face. And so I guess it's a bit like what they say on Moneyball. Like if a team makes mistakes, you take it, right? But in terms of Ishan Kishan with Mumbai, I mean, I was pretty sure that they were going to go heavy on him. If they hadn't have done it, then you're thinking, okay, well, what is their tactic? So you've got to keep an eye on what the implications of them not bidding high on Ishan Kishan. Are they looking to pick up another domestic batter? Is who in the remaining list of players could that player be for them to target? How will that implicate your decision making on that player in particular? Or are they cognizant of the fact that if they spend all this money on Ishan Kishan, they can't buy good bowlers? So could it be that they're now going to go harder on bowlers? So there's a few ways that then their decision tree can go from not having bid on Ishan Kishan to start with. So yeah, teams do things that are unexpected all the time. The critical thing if you're a rival team, is one, to gratefully receive the mistakes that they make, but two, if it is unexpected, but a good decision from them, how do you counteract that in later rounds?
So in that example, if Mumbai hadn't bid on Ishan Kishan, that would, I guess, inflate the price of bowlers in that IPL mega auction, and
Possibly.
you would have to factor that into all of your bids moving forward.
Or
So you
like-
might have said, "Cut
Yeah.
off the bidding on Rabada." I think you picked up Rabada in that auction. It was
Mhm.
10 crore, but now we're going to stretch to 12 because
Yeah.
we know that there's a little bit more money on the table in this section of the auction.
Or that player might now be like the last really good player in that particular skill set. So they, for example, might pass up Ishan Kishan, but there might only be one good wicket-keeper batter from a domestic pool left in the entire auction. So then the valuation of that player probably has inflated because of that decision.
Absolutely. Right, Dan, we're going to take a really quick break. I've got a handful more questions for you, and then we're going to just pick up what we received from the listeners in part 3.